When both you and the narcissist enter a period of silence, it doesn't create peace like most people assume. Instead, it creates a psychological storm beneath the surface because, for the first time, someone is no longer controlling the direction of the connection, and that person is not you. Many people believe that when communication stops on both sides, it simply means the relationship has reached its ending point. But what often happens behind the scenes is much more complicated. This is the moment when the narcissist may begin experiencing an internal disturbance while your own process of healing begins to take shape. Stay with this because what happens after mutual silence is something many people never understand. Learning this psychological pattern can help you recognize the cycle, detach from it, and finally stop repeating the same emotional patterns. When the communication completely stops between you and the narcissist, the first stage on their side is what can be described as a period of internal recalculation. It is quiet, hidden, and often invisible from the outside, which is why many people fail to notice it. While you may view your silence as a decision to protect yourself, regain your peace, and create emotional distance, the narcissist may view it through a completely different lens. They don't always see your silence as healing or as a healthy boundary. Instead, they analyze it as information. They start trying to understand what changed, what caused the shift, and why their usual methods are no longer creating the same reaction. Their focus is often not on the pain they caused, but on understanding why their influence appears to be weakening. During this stage, their thoughts may revolve around questions like, did you finally move on? Are you trying to send a message? Are you intentionally creating distance? Has someone else entered your life? Are you waiting for them to make the first move? Rather than looking inward and genuinely examining their behavior, they often search for explanations that help them make sense of the situation from their own perspective. Your silence becomes something they feel they need to interpret because uncertainty can be extremely uncomfortable for someone who is used to feeling in control. They begin searching for clues, trying to understand whether this is temporary or whether something more permanent has changed. This is also why a narcissist may not immediately reach out when you disappear from their life. Their silence does not always mean they no longer care or that they have forgotten you. Sometimes it can be a calculated pause where they wait and observe. They may quietly monitor what is happening around you, notice changes in your behavior, pay attention to your online presence, or look for signs that reveal whether they still have emotional access to you. They are not necessarily rushing because they may believe the old pattern will repeat itself. They remember the moments when you reached out first, apologized first, or tried to repair the connection, and they may expect the same thing to happen again. The narcissist often believes that the person they once had emotional control over will eventually return. Because of this belief, your silence may not immediately register as a final ending. Instead, they may interpret it as a temporary reaction, a phase, or a moment where you are expected to come back. They rely on the emotional patterns that existed before, the guilt you carried, the fear of losing the relationship, the desire to fix things, or the hope that things would eventually become peaceful. They expect those emotions to pull you back toward them. But when you remain silent, when you stop reacting the way they predicted, something begins to change. The uncertainty becomes stronger because the old dynamic is no longer working. They begin questioning whether their influence is fading and whether they still have the same power they once had. That is when your silence starts affecting the balance between you. In a narcissistic dynamic, silence is rarely viewed as meaningless. It can represent either a chance to regain control or a sign that control is slipping away. The longer you maintain your distance, the more they are forced to face a reality they did not expect. The person they thought would always return may have finally chosen themselves. When both you and the narcissist remain quiet, the emotional reality happening inside each person is completely different. And that difference reveals something many people struggle to understand. You are often experiencing the pain of loss, while they are often experiencing the frustration of losing access. When you stop reaching out, you are usually carrying the emotional weight of everything that happened between you. You are processing the disappointment, the broken promises, the confusion, the emotional exhaustion, and all the unanswered questions that were left behind. You may find yourself feeling sadness, loneliness, guilt, or even questioning your own choices. You are not only grieving the relationship itself, but also the version of yourself that kept trying, kept forgiving, and kept accepting things that slowly drained you. Your silence usually comes after reaching an emotional limit. It comes from a place where your mind and body are tired of constantly being in survival mode. You are trying to create distance from the chaos and reconnect with your own sense of peace, self-respect, and emotional stability. That process can feel heavy because you are not just stepping away from a person. You are confronting memories, habits, attachments, and parts of yourself that became lost while trying to maintain the connection. It can affect your confidence, your ability to trust your own judgment, your thoughts at night, and the way you see yourself. You are rebuilding internally, and that requires facing emotions that may have been ignored for a long time. The narcissist, however, often processes that same silence from a completely different psychological place. They may not sit with the emotional consequences of what happened in the same way you do. Instead of deeply examining the damage, the pain they caused, or what needs to change, their attention may turn toward the sudden absence of what they were used to receiving. Your silence interrupts a familiar pattern. They were accustomed to having access to your attention, your emotional reactions, your explanations, your attempts to fix things, and even your frustration. Every response, whether positive or negative, reminded them that they still had an emotional connection to you. When that access disappears, something they depended on suddenly stops. For them, the discomfort may not come from losing the relationship in the same way you experience it. It may come from losing the attention, influence, and emotional availability they once received. It feels less like heartbreak and more like a disruption to something they believed would always be there. Their thoughts may not be focused on, "I hurt someone important and lost them." Instead, they may focus on questions like, "Why are they not responding?" Or, "Why are they acting differently now?" The absence becomes noticeable because the dynamic they relied on is no longer functioning. Your pain and their reaction exist in two very different emotional realities. You may be mourning the connection while they are trying to understand their loss of access. You may be working on healing your wounds while they are trying to understand why their usual methods no longer create the same response. Over time, this contrast becomes even more obvious. You begin seeing how much emotional energy you invested, how often you silenced your own needs, and how much responsibility you carried to keep the relationship stable. Meanwhile, they may begin noticing that the reactions they once depended on are no longer available. The imbalance that existed before becomes easier for you to recognize. Your silence creates an opportunity for self-reflection and growth because you are finally able to hear your own thoughts without constant emotional interference. For the narcissist, that same silence may create frustration because it removes the reassurance that they still have influence. The emotional burden you carry is connected to healing, understanding, and rebuilding yourself. The discomfort they experience may be connected to losing the convenience of having someone who constantly responded, adjusted, and remained emotionally available. When silence exists between you and the narcissist, it can feel like a peaceful separation to you, but to them, it may feel like a challenge to their sense of control. Someone who is focused on maintaining power in a relationship may not view your silence as a healthy boundary. Instead, they may interpret it as resistance. The reason is simple. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop trying to convince them, the dynamic they depended on begins to change. Your silence removes the emotional reactions that once made them feel significant. Even conflict provided them with a sense of connection because your anger, frustration, or attempts to communicate still showed that they occupied space in your emotional world. Silence changes that completely. When you argue with them, they still have your attention. When you defend yourself, they still have an opportunity to redirect the conversation. When you react emotionally, they still feel involved. But when you become calm and unavailable, they are forced to face something they cannot easily manipulate, a situation they cannot control. Your silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty can be deeply uncomfortable for someone who needs to feel powerful or in charge of the emotional environment. Instead of recognizing your silence as exhaustion, self-protection, or a decision to heal, they may create their own explanation for it. They may convince themselves that you are trying to punish them, play a game, or get a reaction. They may label your distance as disrespectful or unfair because accepting the real reason behind it would require them to confront their own behavior. Rather than asking, "What did I do that pushed this person away?" they may ask, "Why are they refusing to respond to me anymore?" As the silence continues, some narcissists may turn the situation into a competition. They may see it as a battle of who will break first. Others may rewrite the story in their mind and view themselves as the person who was abandoned, even if their own actions contributed to the distance. This allows them to protect their self-image instead of taking responsibility. They may focus on how your silence affects them rather than understanding what caused you to reach that point. Eventually, your silence becomes a reflection they cannot easily avoid. It shows them that something has changed. The person who once reacted, explained, chased, or tried to repair everything is no longer playing the same role. That shift can create discomfort because it challenges the belief that they will always have emotional access to you. They may assume you will eventually return because that happened before, or they may search for ways to regain control of the situation. But the deeper message behind your silence is something they may struggle to accept. You are no longer responding from the same place, and their influence over your emotions may no longer be what it once was. When both you and the narcissist completely stop reaching out, the internal experience on each side becomes very different. For you, silence may represent a chance to breathe again, a space where you can process everything that happened and begin understanding what you went through. It can become a period of reflection, recovery, and emotional separation. But for the narcissist, your absence can create a psychological emptiness that forces them to face something they often try to avoid, the feeling of losing control. They usually do not view the situation as two people creating healthy distance. Instead, they may experience your withdrawal as a disruption in the dynamic that once supported their sense of importance. Your silence changes the structure they were comfortable with, and that change can create internal discomfort. A narcissist's sense of value often depends heavily on external validation. Their confidence is not always built from a stable inner foundation, but from the reactions, attention, and emotional responses they receive from others. The people around them become part of the system that reinforces how they see themselves. Your attention, your reactions, your attempts to resolve conflict, and even the moments when you returned after being hurt all played a role in maintaining that dynamic. When you step away and stop participating, the cycle is interrupted. Suddenly, they are faced with the reality that the influence they believed they had may not be as strong as they assumed. Your silence challenges the version of the story they created in their mind. They may have viewed themselves as the person with the power, the person who could predict your actions, and the person who could always pull you back into the same pattern. But when you stop responding according to their expectations, that belief starts to weaken. Without your emotional reactions, they lose the evidence they once used to convince themselves that they still had control. There is no argument to win, no emotion to manipulate, and no reaction to measure. The absence of your response becomes uncomfortable because it removes the role they expected you to continue playing. This is when their internal state may begin to shift. They might replay old conversations, analyze past situations, or search for clues about what changed. They may wonder whether someone else has entered your life or whether you have finally reached a point where you no longer need their presence. They may begin looking for ways to regain influence, even if they have not directly contacted you yet. The hardest part for them is not simply missing communication. It is losing visibility into your thoughts and emotions. They no longer know what you are feeling, what you are planning, or whether they still occupy the same place in your mind. That uncertainty can be deeply uncomfortable because they are no longer positioned at the center of your emotional world. They are outside looking in, and that can challenge the sense of importance they once had. The confidence they displayed may begin turning into curiosity, frustration, or suspicion. The certainty they once carried may become doubt. And all of this can be triggered by something that appears simple from the outside: your decision to stop engaging. When the silence continues between both of you, it may appear as though nothing is happening. There may be no messages, no conversations, and no visible movement. But internally, the narcissist may begin searching for ways to restore the emotional balance they feel they have lost. When their usual methods of gaining attention no longer work, they may turn toward behaviors designed to reopen the connection. These actions are often not random. They are attempts to regain access to the emotional space they once occupied. One common response is hoovering, which is when they attempt to draw you back into interaction. At first, they may assume that your silence is temporary and that you will eventually return, especially if that pattern happened before. But when you continue holding your distance, they may begin feeling the impact of your absence. Their approach might come in the form of a casual message, a reminder of a shared memory, an apology, or a sudden display of care and attention. They may appear more understanding or emotionally aware than before. However, the deeper motivation may not always be genuine emotional growth. Sometimes, the goal is simply to restore the connection and regain the influence they feel they have lost. If that approach does not work, they may move toward another strategy: provoking a reaction. This can happen through subtle comments, social media behavior, attempts to create jealousy, or messages designed to trigger anger, curiosity, or emotional engagement. The important thing for them may not be whether your reaction is positive or negative. The important thing is that you are reacting. Any emotional response can reassure them that they still have some level of impact. Your silence removes that confirmation, so provoking a reaction becomes a way to test whether the connection is still active. When those attempts fail, some may turn toward triangulation, where another person is brought into the situation to influence your emotions. This could involve mentioning a new relationship, highlighting someone else's attention, or creating a comparison that makes you question your place. The purpose is often not about genuine connection with that third person. Instead, it can be a way to create insecurity, competition, or emotional pressure. By making you feel replaced or uncertain, they may hope you will re-enter the dynamic and seek reassurance. But these behaviors are not necessarily signs of deep love or emotional maturity. They often reveal a dependence on external validation and a need to feel significant through another person's reaction. Hoovering, provoking, and triangulation are attempts to repair a damaged sense of control rather than evidence of true emotional transformation. The discomfort they experience comes from the sudden interruption of a pattern they relied upon. Your silence becomes powerful because it removes the emotional energy that once kept the cycle alive. As the silence stretches longer, something unexpected begins to happen. While you may start seeing the distance as a path toward healing, acceptance, and peace, the narcissist may experience it as increasing uncertainty. Your quiet is not always interpreted as calmness. It may feel like a loss of influence. When someone depends heavily on the attention and reactions of others to maintain their sense of importance, the absence of those reactions can create internal tension. Your silence becomes a reminder that they can no longer automatically reach into your emotions whenever they want. What feels like peace to you may feel like instability to them. The same silence that gives you room to rebuild yourself can create discomfort because it removes the connection they once used to feel powerful. And that is why your absence can have such a strong psychological impact. It is not simply that communication has stopped, it is that the entire dynamic has changed. The person who once responded is no longer responding in the same way, and that shift forces them to confront a reality they may have been avoiding. They no longer have the same control over your attention, your emotions, or your life. They often rely on constant external stimulation to maintain their sense of importance. Attention, admiration, emotional reactions, conflict, and even chaos can all become ways for them to feel significant in someone else's life. When you remove yourself from that cycle and stop providing the emotional energy they once received, it can create an internal discomfort they are not used to managing. They are no longer receiving the same feedback that reinforced their self-image. Your silence removes the mirror they depended on, and without that reflection, they may begin struggling with feelings they usually avoid. The absence of your reactions creates a psychological shift because they can no longer measure their influence through your emotions. At first, they may try to convince themselves that your silence does not affect them. They might appear completely unaffected, distant, or even act as though they are enjoying the separation. They may present an image of confidence and indifference, but that outward behavior does not always reflect what is happening internally. As the silence continues, the lack of attention becomes more difficult to ignore. Without your responses reinforcing their importance, they may begin feeling unnoticed or disconnected from the validation they once received. These feelings can be especially uncomfortable because they challenge the image they have built of themselves as someone who is always valued, desired, or in control. While you are using the distance to reconnect with yourself, they may experience that same distance as an uncomfortable emptiness. Your healing process often begins quietly. Your mind starts becoming clearer because you are no longer constantly analyzing their behavior, predicting their moods, or trying to prevent the next conflict. The emotional fog that surrounded you slowly begins to disappear. You start remembering who you were before the relationship consumed so much of your attention. You begin recognizing your own needs, your own strength, and the parts of yourself that may have been pushed aside while trying to maintain peace. The longer the silence continues, the more noticeable this contrast becomes. You begin finding stability in the quiet, while they may struggle with the uncertainty created by it. They may replay old conversations, search for hidden meanings, or create explanations for why you are no longer responding the way you once did. They may wonder what changed, what caused you to detach, or whether they still have the same impact on you. The uncertainty can become frustrating because they no longer have direct access to your thoughts and emotions. What they may miss is not always the relationship itself in the same way you experienced it. They may miss the emotional reflection they received through your reactions, the reassurance that they still mattered, that they could still influence your feelings, and that they still had a place in your emotional world. Meanwhile, you are gradually returning to yourself. You are rebuilding your confidence, restoring your peace, and recognizing the difference between love and emotional exhaustion. The same silence that gives you freedom can feel threatening to someone who depended on your constant engagement. When the silence continues between you and the narcissist, another transformation begins happening inside you. It may not happen overnight, and at first it can feel confusing because your mind and body are adjusting to a reality they have not experienced for a long time. Throughout the relationship, your nervous system may have been operating under constant pressure. You may have spent so much time monitoring their emotions, predicting their reactions, and preparing yourself for unexpected changes that living in tension started to feel normal. Even peaceful moments may have carried a sense of uncertainty because you were always waiting for the next emotional shift. This is why the beginning of silence can sometimes feel uncomfortable. Your body does not immediately recognize peace as safety. After being exposed to constant emotional stress, the absence of conflict may actually feel unfamiliar. You may feel restless, anxious, or tempted to search for answers simply because your mind has been trained to stay alert. This reaction is not a sign that you are weak or that you cannot move on. It is your body adjusting after spending so much time in a state of emotional survival. But as the silence continues, something powerful begins to happen. The constant mental noise starts to fade. You no longer spend every moment trying to understand their behavior, manage their reactions, or protect yourself from another emotional storm. Slowly, your thoughts become your own again. You begin noticing moments of calm that may have been missing for a long time. Your sleep may improve, your energy begins returning, and you start experiencing a sense of stability that once felt impossible. This is the process of your mind and body finding balance again. You are no longer using all your emotional energy to respond to someone else's needs, moods, or expectations. The space created by silence allows you to reconnect with your own identity. You begin making choices based on what feels right for you, rather than what will prevent conflict or keep someone else satisfied. You start listening to your own feelings without immediately questioning them. The most important part of this healing is that it does not depend on their apology, their understanding, or their ability to provide closure. The peace you rebuild comes from within you. The silence creates room for you to recover the emotional energy that was once spent constantly trying to fix, explain, or survive the relationship. You begin thinking more clearly, trusting your own judgment again, and recognizing that your life does not have to revolve around managing another person's emotions. While the narcissist may experience the silence as a loss of access, you begin experiencing it as a return to yourself. The same distance that creates discomfort for them creates freedom for you. It becomes the space where your confidence grows, your clarity returns, and the parts of yourself that were hidden beneath the stress finally have room to come back.